Today I'm joined by Chris Arnade. He is someone who went from the high echelons of Wall Street to street photography, and he also wrote an excellent book called Dignity: Seeking Respect in Back Row America, and is now the author of a Substack called Walking the World. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct.
Welcome, Chris. I'm very glad to have you on. I know this has been a long time coming. We've been discussing you coming on and speaking to me for a while, and I've not been the greatest on follow up, but I'm very glad we've finally made it. And yeah, I essentially wanted to maybe start a little bit by describing this change of yours, because I feel like we have one thing in common, is that we are kind of class traders. We've done our best to reach a certain status, and obviously you've worked quite a lot on Wall Street. I mean, it's not easy to get there. You need to tick certain boxes, to jump through certain hoops, and to try your hardest. And you've been there. You kind of looked around for, I guess, around 2 decades and said, okay, this is not for me. I wonder what that transition was like. What was your journey?
Well, thank you. Partly, I if you look at the longer arc of my life, the Wall Street career was kind of an odd choice. I was getting a PhD in physics. I got a PhD in particle physics, and um, I was disillusioned with physics at the time, for both intellectual reasons and then cultural reasons. And I wanted something a little bit more practical. And so I kind of literally stumbled into Wall Street. It was a kind of a far easier process, and I think I got fortunate in some ways, and or unfortunate depending how you look on it. But I stumbled onto Wall Street. I was one of the early rocket scientists. I got there in '93 when Wall Street was booming, and I really quite enjoyed it for 5 or 6 years, and then it became a slow kind of disillusionment with the industry. It was as much the culture, the kind of surroundings I had. I'm quite fond of bankers. I have a lot of close friends who are bankers. I made they're some of the most intellectually nimble people you'll meet, but it's also just it's not me. And I was an academic in some ways, but I also was kind of a bit frustrated with how removed from kind of the real world we were. Literally sitting in front of a wall of computers, a wall of dancing numbers, and betting on them, and just it was really kind of at some ethical level, kind of something I didn't think about much because I've generally been a numbers, I was something of a math prodigy, and I was just kind of taking the path of least resistance. Just kind of someone was paying me to do math. That was really cool. And I really didn't think about the consequences. But I had a family to raise, and I was making good money, and so it was easy not to think about it. And if you had asked me then about my career, I would have said it was kind of neutral. It wasn't really that. It was I wasn't doing great work, but I also wasn't doing great harm. I was just kind of doing a job that was intellectually challenging. The financial crisis kind of changed that. I was rather appalled by the reaction of the bankers around me. I had kind of said, I looked at everybody around me and I said, to be kind of blunt, we effed up. We really messed up here. And I actually saw kind of instead a sense of we did no wrong. The industry should have been more deregulated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I ended up basically focusing more on what I was doing on the weekends than what I was doing during the week. And what I was doing on the weekends was making these long walks. Part of the way I kind of do meditation, or other people do meditation, I go for 20-mile walks, and I was kind of exploring all of New York, and those kind of took over more of my life. I started kind of downplaying the importance of work and focusing more on what I guess was a hobby at that time of kind of just walking New York City and talking to people. And the tenor of the walks took a very much different. It went from kind of a very autistic-minded goal of I have to walk the entire subway system above ground. I have to, I did what I call these terminus walks, walk to the end of a subway and come home and things like that, to kind of just walking for the sake of the experiences of what happened during those walks. And I ended up bringing a camera along, and then in the process, it evolved into basically a form of kind of almost photojournalism, where I was going into these neighborhoods that, someone who is as wealthy and white as me had been told not to go into, and finding what I found there to be very different from what I was generally being told I would find there, both in the good and bad. The good, there was a lot more, to use a cliche, a lot more vibrance, a lot more humanity, a lot more nuance. And the bad was, there was a lot of dysfunctionality that was at a very, very deep level. And so it evolved eventually into some sort of political process, or at least an intellectual process. But I mean, for myself, I like to think of it more as kind of, at a kind of deeper level. Me as a person was evolving from being someone who was very quantitative, and having always looked at life through a quantitative lens, through spreadsheets, through literally, looking at numbers on a screen, to kind of a qualitative approach to learning, a kind of a much more human-based approach to learning. And at some point, it became this. I managed to survive 5 years on Wall Street, despite doing very little, before they finally told me get out. And I was living this kind of double life, where I was during the day coming in and trading, $250 million trades, and then at night in trap houses talking to drug dealers. And so I ultimately had to choose which life I found more enjoyable for myself, and the life where I was spending time talking to people, the kind of quote photojournalism, or I call it pop ethnography, was kind of what I found to be much more where I was happier at an intellectual level, and also where I was growing more intellectually, where I was learning.
Yeah, and this all culminated in the book called Dignity, where you kind of it's not necessarily like you said, you kind of turned it into a political project, but it does feel to me like you've tried to have a stance that is a bit apart. You're not in there, fire and brimstone, either judging or completely looking at this from a completely destigmatize. You're kind of trying to be a participant and a neutral observer, but also um, you know just to tell the story of the people that present themselves to you, and without contextualizing it too much. I think that's kind of how some of the essay struck me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things what I didn't know it at the time, I was what I'm doing, but what I kind of call it now is kind of, again, pop ethnography. It's ethnography in the kind of the way that anthropologists or sociologists used to do it, but could no longer do it because of institutional review boards, but which was basically just, to the degree you can, as an outsider, integrating yourself into a community, and trying to. I mean, there was a process where, after I quit Wall Street, where I spent 3.5 years to 4 years, basically with a group of homeless addicts, a street family in the Bronx, in Hunts Point, the Bronx, which is, I don't know if your listeners, to the degree, they're probably much more global than most podcasts, but it's kind of the worst, quote, worst neighborhood in New York, and it was a place where I spent 3.5, 4 years, becoming very close. I mean, to the point I'm still friends with some of these people who, are the people who, are living under bridges and shooting up 10 bags a day of heroin, and working as prostitutes. So it was a way of trying to, like, to the degree I could. The fly in the wall is a bad cliche, because you're always involved. You can't not be involved when you're in a community like that. You're not standing apart. But I was trying to, in some senses, give give a sense of what was going on in this street family.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an important ingredient in why a lot of people have a fear of these communities. I mean, obviously there is a fear of, immediate physical harm, which I think is something that, I respect you for ignoring, safely ignoring. I guess I'm sure you have stories, but you seem to, still, have physical integrity. You're all good. So you've done this across, maybe as a woman, obviously, the fear might be a little bit, more at the top of my hierarchies and just, going into dangerous neighborhoods. But I think there's also, this is something kind of, a sad part of my psychology that I've noticed is the fear of getting entangled. Because, like you said, you can go and observe, but the fear is that, okay, you will start having a relationship to these people, and then you will start getting entangled in the endless chaos of their lives, and you won't have the heart to not participate, to not, I don't know, lend them money or give them money or, just go ahead and then kind of go down that route. And I feel like I see that, whenever I want to do, I don't know, charitable work for the people around me and things like that, I tend to try to do it in a more neutral way where it's like I use an intermediary or something like that because I feel afraid of that, I don't know, like connection to chaos. And I feel like that's I don't know, some element that creates even a larger separation between these communities and so-called straight whatever communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The first note is you cannot do this as a female, and that's unfair, or that's just the point. I mean, the issue when we talk about these days about gender. I mean, this is just a fact.
Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable fact, but the risk of sexual abuse towards females in these communities is very, very high, and and it's and so what I did could not be done by a single female. Now, I there were times I had a woman who was working with me alongside, and she was treated just as well, but as a couple. If she had gone in by herself, it would have been very. I mean, she did eventually, after building relationships, go in by herself. But you have, in the early stages, especially, you end up being unfortunately an easy target. To the second point, that's effectively why I self-ejected from the project. Um, it, it took a toll on me, uh, emotionally, not physically. I was very careful about. I used to tell people who when I got close to them is I have three rules. One is I do not do you drugs. I do not buy. I do not have sex with it. I'm not going to pay for any sex. I'm not going to get involved in any of this sex work. And three is I sleep in my own bed at night. At some point, these are the three. When you're very clear with people about the rules, they respect that. They kind of like, okay, this guy's got integrity. This is what he does. He does right by his family. And But the entanglements ended up being, at some level, I went through the trying to save people process, to only emerge to kind of a larger point is that it was kind of a, to be somewhat provocative, a colonial mindset of mine to try to save people. Like, they didn't ask to be saved, and I didn't necessarily have the answers. But it was a rough period where, it's only now, and this project ended, that part of the project of being in the Bronx ended in like 2015. I still it's only within the last uh, 6 months or so that I've stopped getting kind of texts every third day from people who still have my number saying, either outright lying or trying to, just say hello, but I know what they want. you know um, they want me to help them, which usually means money. And so, I kind of aged into a maturity level of kind of having, what every person who's very close to addicts ends up having, which is quite the tough love. Like, no, like, this is not gonna, I'm not gonna do this. This is, I just not.
Yeah, I think it's it's a such a complicated one. I think very few people nowadays have not had the experience of even someone in their family dealing with some sort of addiction, and that seems to be like the end point of it. The maturity is to yeah, to stop enabling. And I think that leads to kind of a larger societal point, though obviously it's much easier to stop enabling, not necessarily clear what the results will be in a one-to-one interaction. But at a societal level, I wonder what your kind of what you've learned, what is the maturity that you've gained in terms of the policy that maybe would be useful. Do you have anything that you think would be not a panacea, but maybe a better approach to what is being done now, which is seems to be. I mean, obviously, I have a more kind of a yeah, pretty much right wing perspective on this, where it seems to me like enabling is the policy because this is a complicated problem. Obviously, it's very hard to solve these problems. These people are in hell. You can't just send a helicopter to rescue them. It's going to be much more complicated. So I understand why the empathetic response typically is that to okay, at least make the needle exchanges safe, or just make sure that they can put their tents up in X corridor and things like that. It just
I,
feels yeah
I
like a
think
dereliction. Sorry.
I think I have a lot to say about this, and I have
Yes,
to
of course.
but I think my book is a lot more empathetic than I probably would be now. And that's not necessarily I disown the book. I still, but what I was trying to do at some level in the book was to say, okay, addiction is a form of suicide. It's sometimes people will outright tell you that. There's this quote I forget the quote in the book of someone who basically said it. Of I don't have the courage to put a gun to my head, so I'm killing myself daily out here. And the risk of dying is a well understood risk on the streets, and they accept it because they don't see their life as being that much worthwhile. And I think, that led me to kind of read Durkheim, who wrote about suicide, and really think about, what causes suicide. It's such a human act. No other animals do it, and it's such a huge. I mean, I think we kind of, when you step back and think of that, people kill themselves. I mean, that's a huge statement, and it says something is very, very wrong. So, my book was called Dignity, but for the more academic, if I had titled it myself, not looking at sales, I would have called it Enemy in America. The term enemy that Durkheim talks about, which is kind of effectively, kind of a sense of isolation, a sense of being either too regulated or too unregulated, the sense of not being part of a community, the sense of kind of almost meaninglessness. And I've kind of shifted over the intervening years of thinking a lot more about meaninglessness, in the sense of not having a purpose in life. And so I kind of asked myself, I think at the policy level, we're kind of just moving deck chairs around a sinking ship. To do harm reduction or not do harm reduction, to use incarceration, not use incarceration. Those are going to have impacts in the community. Those are going to have impact on how this tragedy plays out. But the tragedy is going to continue playing out because at a deeper level, what's happening here is we're having kind of a crisis of suicide, a crisis of meaninglessness, the sense that people don't have a purpose in life and don't feel part of a community, and so the people with less self-control within that, who are suffering from that sense of isolation, that sense of loneliness, are turning to drugs. But that sort of sense of isolation, that sense of loneliness, isn't confined to just addicts. It's confined to a lot of the working class, as well as more and more now the upper classes. And so I think I don't really have a policy answer. I've become, at least at a kind of legislative level, I've become a cultural person, in the sense that part of what I'm doing now is I'm in Germany now, but I'm doing the thing, as you said, my Substack is called Walking the World, where I do what I did in New York all over the world. And so in some senses, it's kind of a comparative ethnography of different communities, and comparing cultures. So for instance, I spent 6 weeks I didn't write about this for my Substack. This was before my Substack, but I'm going back. And I spent 6 weeks in the equivalent of basically the slums of Jakarta, which are called kampangs. And there is not the addiction. There is not the crisis of suicide there. There is not the crisis of crime there. There is a surprisingly functional and healthy society, healthy in terms of spiritually. Um, they don't have a lot. Some people literally collect garbage, but people are not killing themselves and part of that is because at the center of each kampong is a mosque, and a mosque gives us a real sense of purpose to people, but also says explicitly you cannot do drugs. So the authority figure who's telling them not to do drugs is not the state, although the state does, because it's a Muslim state, but it's a higher authority than the state. So I think the problems are too large to ask the government to solve them. And part of the reason we're in the problem we're in, because we're asking the government to solve problems that shouldn't be solved, that are cultural and shouldn't be solved by the government. They should be solved by the local community. They should be solved. They shouldn't start in the first place. It should come from much more organic forms of community, like 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 the congregation, like the family, and we don't have that in the West. We've dismantled that. So I feel very much like if we do harm reduction or if we don't do harm reduction, if we do kind of border control, if we don't do border control, these are all issues that are good to debate. But I'm not so sure it's really getting at the core problem, which is a real sickness in our culture.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, there could be good downstream consequences of a lot of these policies, but it's kind of reminds me of the same discussions we're having about pronatalism, and the fact that people have stopped having children, and everyone's talking about tax credits and incremental increases, and countries like Hungary who've managed to do this, and in Georgia they have the Orthodox patriarch blessing every child, doing the baptisms for every new child born in Georgia. It's there are different approaches to do this, but all of them um, are just working on very like marginal increases in something that's been going down vertiginously for a century, for probably at least 50 years. Romania also had a fairly serious decline up to a point, and then with probably one of the most stringent and aggressive pronatalist policies, where essentially any sort of contraception, abortion was criminalized in the sense that the doctors were thrown in jail forever. They've forced kind of pronatal policies, and that I know bumped up the total fertility rate by I don't know 2.5 points or something like that, which is the most successful, most draconian, and most hated program in the world. But yeah, this is not a policy issues. And then the second they lifted the pressure, we had I think some of the highest abortion rates in the known world. So yeah, this isn't the lever, and it feels to me like what is at the core of this is kind of the a pincer movement of two things, where you have on the one hand the fact that um, the the methods of liquefaction of the culture, both in terms of technology and the economy and things like that. The way you are supposed to acquire status now is through essentially going away. The dissolution of these local communities that were supposed to support people in their time of need. And then on the other hand, you also have a lot of newer ways produced by this economy to actually destroy your life if you're not someone who's extremely conscientious. And the thing is, the level of conscientiousness required for you to maintain a normal life now is growing by the year, because all of these products, obviously drugs are the spearhead of this, but even through food, the food commons have been completely obliterated. And even here in Europe, I mean, Europeans are famous for the fact that they are not as fat, but they are
Oh
getting.
no, I just actually wrote. I mean, I just literally walked from I walked from Dusseldorf to no, I'm sorry, from Dortmund down via the Ruhr Valley to Duisburg, and then down to Bonn via Cologne down the Rhine Valley. And I kind of texted my wife. I said, when did we ever get the idea that food portions in the United States were large compared to Europe? I mean, the people here are large, and it's worse than being in that. Eating food in this area was kind of more indulgent than than it is in the U.S. now. And so this idea that this kind of self-indulgence is confined on food is confined to the U.S. and that we're the outlier is might have been true 20, 30 years ago, but is no longer true, at least here in the Ruhr and Rhine Valley of Germany. Um, I mean, the term I like to use um, is kind of this kind of dominant philosophy, and it's been dominant for a while, and it's gotten worse and worse since the world wars. But um, this dominant philosophy of kind of Western secular individuality, um, kind of cons- secular consumerism, where kind of, and this goes back to what comparing my Wall Street to what I do now, where you can justify it if you're looking at data because you're growing the GDP, and that's kind of just the value of that's the goal. And the intellectual philosophical underpinnings are that everybody should be emancipated from any constraints on their individual liberties. We have to emancipate people so that they can do whatever they want, which has led to a very self-indulgent culture. And how that plays out amongst elites is very different than how it plays out amongst the working class. That kind of the elites who kind of very much admire individual liberty, admire like self emancipation from any kind of community, admire kind of individual liberty as the end goal, and admire consumption as the end goal. Live relatively conservative traditional lives. They stay married. They may not have as many kids as Catholics would want them to have, but they have 2 to 3 kids, and they are pretty careful about what they eat, and etc. And that's not how it's playing out in the working class, and it's playing out in the working class in a much more destructive way. And so, kind of, we kind of extrapolate. We live a very different life from that which we. When I went we, I mean highly educated, what I call the current elites, which is now people who have postgraduate degrees from elite universities, and kind of run shit now. We generally live very different lives from that which we celebrate.
Yeah. It seems to me that even the so-called elite tend to try to dip their toe in like a hedonism and total freedom, maybe during their college years, and then they quickly realize they take two mental steps forward and see exactly what could happen, or they have buffers like money or some form of situation where their parents might help them out to get out of a tough spot that might be very destructive for someone who doesn't have that padding around themselves. So yeah, I think it's very easy for being if you're in that situation to promote all sorts of ideas that can have terrible consequences. And I think one of the interesting relatively recent books is the Coming Apart by Charles Murray, who kind of makes a little bit even kind of a more biological case related to this because he says that okay, in the last 50, 60 years, you have a lot of the people going to university, maybe getting these postgraduate degrees, pairing off with each other. Also, a lot of people leaving their hometowns. Essentially the local elite has left these places, and they're all kind of huddling together, married to each other in a completely different place. And that is essentially a kind of a dereliction of duties because these local elites, whatever you might think of them, had a certain function to bring structure, to bring innovation, to bring entrepreneurship and things like that to the places where they came from. Which obviously this happens on a global level as well. I've talked about this happening from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, which has been, the second the Iron Curtain fell, the brain drain started, and yeah, you can see this to the U.S., to Germany, and things like that as well. So I think that's yeah, it feels to me like things are getting more entrenched. Like this is a uniquely separated world that we've entered now.
Yeah, I mean, the division I talk about in my book is the term. The subtitle is, finding, I believe, finding respect in back row America. I use the ethnographic types, and this doesn't hold for everybody, obviously, between front row and back row. The point being is that I use a classroom analogy for a reason, which is I think our most salient division these days is education. And I don't like to go to biological solutions. I find them to be. I don't have much respect for sociobiology beyond a certain very limited case. But I do think I will say that to the point about when people say when push back against race and saying that's the biggest. I've said is one of the as an economist pointed out to me who I was debating about this, he made a very good point to his credit on my case, which was when you can look at the way you look at the importance of a divide is whether or not there are intermarriages within that divide. There are people there. Find me an academic or a person with a postgraduate or post a master's or higher that will marry somebody who does not go to college. Those couplings don't happen anymore, and they've fallen off a cliff. And that gives you a sense of what do people see as their people? Well, they marry within their caste, and so I think we're having this great sorting going on where the educated are clustering together and leaving in their wake what I call the back row, the people who others you call them working class, but it's not an economic. It generally tracks economically, but it's not. There are people who don't have high school educations who make more money than adjunct professors. But that's not the point. The point is that culturally, the division in the country that's biggest is education, and what we're doing now through our kind of educational meritocratic system that kind of the U.S. And Western Europe kind of feel every country should follow. Is we're effectively intellectually strip mining the country and the world. And I speak a lot at colleges, and I speak a lot to very young, gifted people, educationally gifted people in these communities. And I would never not tell them not to leave. I left mine. It's not right for me to tell somebody not to do what I did. And there's a lot to be said for being, an intellectual who travels the world, and that's kind of what I am. What I say is, you can leave, but you have to understand what you're leaving and understand, that what you're going to join is a minority. We are the weirdos. We are the like 2% of the population who feel like we can speak on behalf of the other 90%, 88%, and know what's best for them. It's very much a kind of a scolding mentality that once we get into these places, we think we know what's best for the 98%. When I would say that we are very, very different from the 98%. I'm not saying we're worse. I'm not saying we're better. We're just very different. And I think we have to keep that in mind when we make policies and when we promote cultural values, and when we suggest to others what they should do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But I feel like there is something to be said for the fact that you know an elite has always existed, and there has been a certain um, admiration, a certain kind of trickle down of values from the elite. I mean, you see this nowadays as well. There is kind of a celebrity class, a high status class. People are interested in what their values are. Tabloid journalism. That's essentially what they follow. And you could say, okay, it's not necessarily that we can dispense with the elite, but their values nowadays have essentially been in the gutter. There's no noblesse oblige. There's no nobility to being an elite. It's just someone who can either make a lot of money or can, be narcissistic enough to present themselves in, various states of undress online, because that seems to be the current profile of the celebrity. So, there's nothing to look up to. There's no obligation from the top to the bottom. And I don't think necessarily, at least for me, I don't think you could break this connection between people looking up to kind of a high status group, but that what you can possibly do is to actually um, you know, make or have the noblesse oblige in the high status group to actually promote the values that you said yourself they're actually living. So they live conservative lives. They come from intact families. They go through a very conscientious process to either start businesses or follow through in school and things like that. It's very different from all the theorizing and everything that's been promoted in the media, which is essentially very much a kind of a non-judgmental, destigmatizing worldview where let your freak flag fly, anything goes. It's the only sin is actually casting judgment on your fellow man, and I think that's feels to me like a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, we in the elite, do not value organic community, because we've, at least in terms of place, we're extraordinarily mobile. I we don't value kind of, and so we devalued them. And spirituality is another one we don't value because there's a scientific rationalist mindset within the intellectual class where, although there is a fair minority of intellectuals who are spiritually, who are religious. We don't. We're very much. It's it's awkward when you're elite to suggest that perhaps the working class should be spiritual as well. That there is value in the transcendent. There's value in spiritualism. There's value in faith. Beyond, at most, kind of almost what I would say is a kind of utilitarian value that's kind of, in many ways, while it's better than atheism, to say religion is good for the working class because it provides them structure, it's ultimately pretty insulting, because it sees things in a very gross utilitarian ways. It's like the poor people need faith, we don't need it. So consequently, I think at a very, I call it kind of like when you look at the elites, what is their ultimate, what's our purpose in life? What everybody has a purpose in life. Everybody has kind of like a thing they want to give them solace that they lived a good life. And in the elites, it's careerism. It's kind of a material careerism, which is like, I can die happy if I've written 9 books. I can die happy if if my resume is going to make it to the New York Times obit. I can die happy if I have a lot of wealth. I would say that's almost at right angles to what 98% of the world sees as their purpose on life, or has seen on their purpose on life. Careerism matters. I'm not going to say people don't take their jobs seriously. They don't take pride in their work, but much which for 40,000 years has gotten people through life has been either religion, family, or place. These what I call transcendent forms of meaning, or I call them non-credential forms of meaning. Things you don't need a resume to feel proud about. We've kind of, in that sense, at a very, very deep kind of meaning level. So I wrote an essay once called "Divided by Meaning." Meaning is like we just see the world very differently from the 98%. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, we set the agenda, because we run all the institutions that ultimately, I differ from the right wing in the sense that I don't think economics trickles down. I do, however, think culture trickles down. Especially in this age where the elite. Um, I It was interesting is to contrast how the working class in England operates versus how the working class in the United States operates. I walked, last summer, I walked from Liverpool over to Hull. I walked across England through kind of their old coal belt, which is at many levels, kind of a level of dysfunction that matches the U.S. level of dysfunction. There's a level of alcoholism and a level of kind of, but one of the things that struck me was this system. You talked about there's always been a ruling class, and that's true. And I think you're always going to have you're always going to have, no matter what you can structure. I mean, anybody who grew up in communism knows this. You're going to always have an elite. Um, um, what's so kind of pernicious about the system we've built in the U.S. and the West is we tell everybody that with enough hard work they can be part of the elite. Just read enough books. Why the problem with that is there's multiple problems with that, but one is I don't think it's necessarily true. But but two, and I'm not saying it's an awful system in some ways. I mean, in some ways, we like to have a lot of mobility, but the flip side of it, kind of the corollary to the idea that with enough hard work you can make it to the top is, if you haven't made it to the top, you're a loser, and it's your fault. And so it's very much makes a sense of being always, there's a sense of instability there that makes people in the working class feel very much like they're losers. And it doesn't give them the freedom to create a culture that they can call their own. One of the things that was interesting about, about England, where there is a lot less class mobility. Kind of the joke I've said in the past is the monarchy, in some senses, is better because at least it tells the working class that they're never going to make it to the top, and it gives them the freedom, consequently, to build their own thing, to build a culture where they look at the royalty and they can either laugh at it and say, whatever, that's not me, and take pride in what they are, without feeling a sense of being a loser. And so, in some senses, you find that in England, where you still have that sense of like, I wasn't born to be upper class, so I'm going to take pride in being lower class, and that can give them a sense of purpose in life, develop a society, a culture that isn't entirely dysfunctional.
Yeah, I have to mirror that. I think the most dysfunctional place I've ever been to, though I have not walked America definitely in the same way as you have, has been Blackpool in England, which is a seaside town that's been, I guess, pretty much deserted. It still has kind of like a little attraction center, but if you move away one row of houses into the inside, without not on the promenade, but into the interior of the city, it is just people just out of their minds on drugs, probably alcoholics, but you could see that there was some serious either heroin or crack or something that's, absolutely debilitating, and just, people walking like zombies through these deserted streets filled with garbage. And it was just so shocking because, there were a few, like, I don't know, there's a McDonald's there and a little whatever chain restaurant on the seaside, and the seaside is really beautiful. And then the second you turn around and you look into actually how are people spending their time, the locals, how are they spending their time? Well, half of them are in withdrawal, or I don't know exactly what state, they're literally out of their mind.
Go to Huddersfield. Huddersfield is the worst in England I've seen, but England doesn't compare to the U.S. I mean, it's bad, but I would say that, in general, in aggregate, while they have the I think one of the disservices my books did was because it was overly broad, was it didn't talk about the working class, what I call the back row, is has two very, very distinct segments. I would call it the dependent poor, and the working poor, and they do not like each other, and they do not like each other for obvious reasons, but it's also not just as simple they don't like each other. The relationship between the two is very, very much more nuanced than I think we elites have towards kind of the work, the dysfunction, the dependent poor, because sometimes it's family members. It's people that they have a much more visceral attitude towards addiction and dysfunction, because it's you go to any kind of working class community in England or the U.S. There'll be 10 houses on a block where where 9 have their yards mowed, have little statuary where people care, and then there's a 10th where there's 4 broken cars and the police are being called at 2 in the morning. The other 9 did not like that house. And so when talking about, like I said, I've done a disservice in the past when talking about kind of the working poor as one group, or the poor as one group, or the back row as one group, when in fact it's 2 very distinct groups. And I think what happens is why we share, U.S. and England share our population, that's kind of the dependent poor, is larger in some senses, but they're also more disruptive, and they cause more I would also say in England the kind of working poor are kind of more functional than our working poor, and then there's the issue which I'll disagree with, at least the right wing on. There's guns. You can't diminish the fact that the U.S. has guns, and it's a constitutional right. I'm not questioning that.
Yeah.
But
I think the right wing would agree with you then the fact that you can't diminish the fact that the US has guns, in the sense that if you were to, declare that they're going to be impounded tomorrow, maybe not everyone would show up to to let them go. So I think that's that's probably the middle ground there.
where I say disagree is, I think the fact that we allow people to have as many guns as they can is doesn't help society.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you compare it to other countries where, like Switzerland, obviously, there are all sorts of implications you can draw from this. There are a lot of guns in Switzerland, not a lot of gun crime in Switzerland. But yeah, it's the fact that there are a lot of guns and a lot of types of guns in the US is definitely something that fuels the black market of guns, which is where a lot of the crime comes from. A lot of the guns that are used for
It
mass
just
murder, things like that, are illegal.
it just turns the dysfunction. It makes the dysfunction that much more violent. I agree with you that the cause of the dysfunction is not guns, but
Yeah,
the
I mean, I used to live in.
the ramifications are consequently much more violent.
Yeah, just the scale and, yeah, the massive wounds that you can inflict with guns is obviously larger than what you can do with knives. But I have to say, in my former neighborhood in East London, they could do a swell job with knives as well. It was, at least at least every week there was a stabbing, wounded or fatal, but they're definitely on the job with knives as well. So, yeah, it's, there's something going on that's not betrayed by just the tools that people use.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. is, and it's gotten worse over the, kind of being inconsistent with what I said earlier. I mean, policy does matter, and and so kind of the deregulation that's gone on by the government, in terms of the kind of anti incarceration movement, um, has made the consequences, and has made these neighborhoods more dysfunctional. And so the U.S. is in a bad place right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the patterns and the stories that you highlight, these people come from families with a lot of dysfunction. a
Correct.
lot of dysfunction that has been, essentially whoever was there in the before times. I remember someone was mentioning that you would just leave the children with the grandparents. Well, now the grandparents, it's been a few generations, the grandparents are exactly as dysfunctional as the children.
I
There's
mean,
no one to leave the children
one
with.
one of the really sad things talking about the meritocracy, and why I don't think necessarily we have a meritocracy, is that very fact, which is, you see these one of the most depressed, one of the most sad things is you see these bright kids in these neighborhoods, and these very talented kids in the neighborhoods who end up having to be the adult in the family for dysfunctional, and consequently they're not going to get into Harvard. They cannot, you know, the extraordinary ones do, because a combination of luck and just intense dedication to it. But you see these kids who have to basically be the father uh, or the mother to younger kids, but also to the one adult in the house who is, they make sure, there's, I can give you a case, of a kid who, would sometimes miss school because he had to make sure to get his mom to court. So she would, so she could not get ejected from the house. He had to get her out of bed, remind her to be there on time, to kind of literally get her to place A, so that they wouldn't get ejected from their house, or they wouldn't, lose whatever payments they were getting. And so this kid's bandwidth couldn't handle both running a family with addicts in it, and at the same time, ace the necessary exams to get into the school he wanted to get into, or she wanted to get into. And so I started this project. If you had talked to me in 2010, I would have been your kind of knee jerk liberal. I would have been, spouting all the kind of things you're supposed to spout to be a good liberal. But 12 years later, after working in this project, there's absolutely zero. There's no chance you can, unless you're an ideologue of the most inflexible ideologue of the most hard. There's no chance you can do what I did, or anybody does, and spend time in these communities and not come away looking at the importance of family, not saying we need two stable adults in a house. Without that, there's just that's if there's any one kind of root answer. That's about as close as it gets. You cannot have the dissolution of a family to the degree you have and not have consequences. There was this really tragic case of the police shooting a young boy, 13-year-old boy, and I believe it was Chicago. At kind of, they saw him in an alley with a gun at 2 a.m. And this was during the height of the George Floyd stuff. And this boy was African American. And so there was an outrage, as a 13-year-old boy is killed by the police. I don't know if he was killed or not. I don't remember the details. Shot by the police. I mean, I think that there should be an outrage, but the response by one of the kind of police commissioner, I believe it was, who was African American, I believe, somebody said, "What was this boy doing in the alley at 3 a.m?" And that's exactly the right. I mean, that's it was politically inconvenient at the time to ask that, but I mean, you got to ask that. Like, what the hell is this kid doing in the alley at 2:33 a.m. with a gun? Where is the parents? Where is the functional uncle? Where is the functional, whoever? When I was doing my work with addicts, I stopped asking. I generally ask kind of background questions eventually. I stopped asking young women, about their father, because I knew the answer. The answer was going to be he wasn't there, or that he abused me sexually. And it wasn't the father who was abusing her sexually. If it wasn't the father who was abusing these women sexually, it was the boyfriend. The problem with the problem with kind of these kind of out of wedlock children is not necessarily what you think it is. It's that the woman gets the child, and it's not like one woman raising a child. That's the problem. Is that it's the men that come into the house who are the problem. If you talk to any prosecuting attorney, you talk to anybody who works, any social worker, again, who's not ideologically blinded at this point, who talks to if you see a woman who's been abused in these communities, it's almost like the prime suspect. It's the mother's boyfriend. It's the mother's live-in boyfriend, periodic boyfriend, and the problem in many ways with the dissolution of the family is that is not that there's not a stable man there. There's a multiple of men circulating through the house, and causing, and eventually, um, there was this line from U.S. Baseball asking this manager, why, um, saying, like, he kept changing pitchers until he found one who didn't have anything. And that's kind of like what happens with these men coming through here. You keep bringing men into the house until you find one who's evil, and they do irreparable damage to what this. Another thing I'll never forget, and it's really one of the saddest things, is I was working with this group in Hunts Point. There's a really wonderful group called Hunts Point Alliance for Children, and they basically try to replace the family. They work with single mothers generally who have bright kids, and they're like, it's just they basically take the kid at the age of sixth grade and do a full immersion. The kid comes after school program. They put them in. They place them into private schools. They have the mother come in, twice a week. The counseling, the whole thing. They basically are there to provide a support network. And so, when these kids got to be 12 and 12th grade, and they're placed in colleges, I did this little photo project where I asked each of them to take their portrait, and I asked them to bring something they cared about. And I wanted to and they chose where to take the picture. The idea was something from your past, and before you go off to this new front row life, this new elite life. And there was this really wonderful girl I was very attached to, African American girl. She was raised by her grandparents, who reminded me a lot of my daughter at the time. They were very much exactly the same age, but she brought this kind of anime notebook where she would scribble her writings in. It was her kind of diary, and she wanted to hold that in front of her grandparents' house. And the whole process of the amount of cat calls, the amount of screams she got from the men who were lining the streets, like, yo, I don't even want to repeat them. The crude sexualized statements to her, the kind of mocking her for being kind of a nerd, and not being sexualized. And the finding the sexualization that she was trying to hide because she just wanted to live her life. She had to put up with that. And, I almost killed someone on her behalf. I almost got into fights on her behalf. And she was like, no, don't do this. Don't. It's going to only bring me more problems. Like, you got to learn how to. So, these kids, especially these young women in these neighborhoods, to escape, to deal what they have to deal with at each level. It's just so heart-rending, and it's just so painful to watch.
Yeah, I think this is one thing that's very much underestimated by the liberal imagination, is the concentric circles of chaos, and the fact that it just turns into this maelstrom that sucks in everything around itself. And the maelstrom now is the size of entire cities, the size of entire regions. And I just this reminded me of something. It's kind of a phenomenon that you observe here in Romania. We had, obviously, Romanian orphanages are famously horrendous, and you see a certain type of person, a woman that you would probably describe as someone who's maybe like trying to be transgender or something, extremely butch, like a very butch lesbian, usually more kind of a Roma, I think, in terms of her ethnicity, with short hair, maybe like a metal T-shirt and something like that. And pretty much every woman that comes out of the foster system or orphanages here in Romania, because they've moved orphanages because of the bad PR and the horrendous stories, into kind of a more distributed foster system, which has its own problems. But they all look the same. they all are fleeing from their womanhood. You can literally know exactly where these women have been from the way they choose to present themselves. And I feel like that probably hides some stories that I don't know. It's definitely not something good. The fact that this is just such a consistent pattern that you can see, and a lot of them have mental health issues, which could be something that's tied into what happened to them, but it's a very kind of a systematic phenomenon, and it's just horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, I can only contrast what I see in the U.S. with, the other place I've spent a fair amount of time is the working class communities in Istanbul, um, and there's a lot of there's a lot of when people go to Istanbul, they don't go to this part of Istanbul. Um, you know, and if you when you go to this part of Istanbul, and this is kind of where I spend my time in Istanbul, is kind of the Asian side, um, which is middle class, lower class Muslim, at least the communities I spend in time in, and you get a very different view of the world than if you kind of read the New York Times, or listen to where everybody hates Erdogan and he's somehow hoodwinked this population. No, he's very popular there. Well, he probably will lose this election. We'll see. But he's been there for 20 years. Been there for 20 years because kind of there's this but there's this kind of conservative Muslim. It's not fanatical Muslim. It's conservative Muslim um, that plays out in these communities, and where it's supported. You do not see this drug problem. You do not see these problems. What you see is you see a lot of you don't see people out there flying their freak flag. You see functional families doing their best to stay functional, and look, I'm nominally a Catholic, but what I tell my Catholic friends is you want to look at kind of a society where you talk about the problem with secular society is go to the Islamic countries, go to places like Jordan, go to places like Jakarta, Indonesia, go to places, and don't go to Bali, go to go to Bandung or go to Jakarta, go to go to Istanbul, and you'll see that where spirituality provides a lot of things, but also it provides where people still value family, still value place. That the downstream effects is you don't have, look, every society is going to have some people who are mentally slow, who have mental incapacities, who are physical incapacities. And what you see in Istanbul is, in many cases, the family takes care of them. They bring them out to the restaurants. They take them to the parks, and there's a support network there. The mosque, the I think a lot of people in the West have a very bad attitude towards Muslims, but when you look at how the mosque provides charitable organization and how they're always open and that you can always go there, and you just don't see the level of dysfunction you see here in the West. And I think it's a question that I haven't quite found fully explored, but I think it's something that I think people should be more open minded to. Is like what's going on here in these Muslim countries that's working so well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate how much Islamic extremism, the way we see it, is the reaction of um, Islamic cultures to the West. I mean, I feel a lot of Islamic countries don't practice, extreme like forms of Wahhabism and things that you see that are pretty much exclusively either not necessarily happening in the West, but targeted as the West as a foe in some sort of I don't know civilizational clash. So I think that's something that you don't see if you
I
don't
think we
actually
see
go.
we in the West see the worst of the Muslims because I don't think when Muslims come into the West they know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I think it brings out the worst in them because they don't, especially when it comes to the gender issue. A woman who is not who is dressing, in their mind flamboyantly, is signaling to them something that the woman doesn't think there's woman isn't signaling to them, and so it gets them it's not a good combination. And so I'm not absolving them. I think if you come to the West, you have an obligation to try to learn about the community you're coming to. But I think it's played out to make there's a level of dysfunction in the Muslim community here in the West that isn't taking place in these countries.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, there's also selection effects of who actually ends up emigrating. I think we have that as well. It's interesting in Eastern Europe, you essentially kind of have two layered, people who have nothing to lose leave, or, are criminally inclined and want to, maybe go to places where people have more money so that they can get that money instead of this money, which is less. Or you have people who are extremely, essentially the brain drain crowd. But people in the middle have, middle class lives and something to lose here, maybe a little bit of property or family that they need to take care of. They stay here, and I think that's probably the type of people that you saw in the Istanbul neighborhoods as well. Like, I think there's also something to be said about what exactly keeps meaning alive, and keeps people together, and it is this, because at the top you have the complete dissolution of need. Like, you really don't need your family. Really, you have money. You go to these universities. Let's say you make a lot of money. You don't necessarily feel like you have an obligation, maybe for philosophical, cultural reasons, to your family, because this is essentially kind of we've been fed. It's like, you need to go out and fulfill your destiny, find your authentic self, and then all the people in your network, your family, they don't need you. I mean, this is kind of the the legacy, the cultural legacy of the boomer generation. They'd rather go on vacations than leave an inheritance to their children. There are all sorts of kind of layers in our culture that say, okay, your family is not your insurance policy. You're on your own. Go get. And the thing is, for a lot of people, this works out in the sense, materially at least, they can actually go afford an apartment, go do this and that. But for a lot of people in kind of the middle class, especially in kind of these second world, third world type situations, that is definitely not the case. They can't rely on the government, either because the programs aren't there, or the government's not reliable. And the only people that they can rely on and need to rely on are the people in their family. So essentially, the meaning making there is kind of a second order effect of the basic need of actually needing to be together to solve fundamental questions of shelter, food, community, things like that. And that's something that's kind of gone.
Yeah, I mean, what I call the transcendent forms of meaning, or the non-credential forms of meaning, have worked for 50,000 years. It's kind of why in the last 200 years we've gone out of our way to kind of throw them out of the way, see them as old-fashioned, and we need to move beyond. Is again, well, beyond me. Is something. I'm not as much a universalist as other people are, but you can't look at broad both history, and you can't look at anthropology and not come to the conclusion there are sort of kind of universal needs, and one of them is faith. I always say that um, the transcendent, or faith, whether it's organized or more personal, is kind of the the rug that's too large for the room. You push the bump down, it's going to pop up someplace else. And it's, by pushing down kind of traditional forms of faith, transcendence, it's popped up again in what I would call, I think wokeism is a bad term, but what I would call is kind of a political mindset on what I call the kind of progressive left, or they've taken on a kind of, this is their faith. Politics is their faith. Careerism is their faith. And if you go back to if you actually look at and religion and science, in some senses, is their faith. They've taken on these kind of you look at land granting or land acknowledgments that universities spout. Man, that's a prayer, man. It's faith without what faith really brings to people, which is both community and regulation. So it's kind of a really, really bad form of transcendence, because it doesn't do what traditional religions do, which is provide both community and regulation.
Yeah, I think the kind of the scientific revolution, or at least the popularization of science revolution, has been a big ingredient there. Because I remember my youthful atheism was very much fueled by books and things I managed to find. I remember I was reading Carl Sagan. That was my first thing that I found. I think I was like 11 or 12 in my parents' library, and I was like, wait a minute. And then all of these kind of popularizer of science, and the popularization of Darwinism with new atheism really put a huge dent, especially in people in my generation. This is here in Romania. This is most people that I know. It really kind of annihilated a lot of, maybe not necessarily, people weren't, especially children in primary school or high school or something, weren't like deeply religious. They didn't know anything about theology, but they had kind of a folk religion and a respect for the traditions of their parents, and going to church as kind of a ritual that was completely lost within, I would say, a window of about 5 years. And this is talking about middle class to upper class. Um, it still obviously exists in quite a vibrant, but still kind of a folk religion way in the rural settings. But because of urbanization, a lot of people from the villages either go to work in the West, or they come to the city because there are more jobs here. So urbanization itself has made a huge dent in what in religiosity and things like that. So yeah, I think there are so many incentives pointed at kind of the dissolving of these so-called unchosen bonds, that I think it's really hard. And I think what I do on the show a lot is maybe propose things that just because of the incentive structure, just impractical. They would mean a top down imposition of whatever thing that I find useful. And obviously I find religion useful, and I'm kind of have my own little battles with my own faith, and I'm Catholic as well. But it is, looking at the sheer volume of incentives, both technological, economic, geographic, the fact that the borders have opened here, that's been a huge change. It's really hard to see how these trends can be even arrested, and not even, I don't really have any proposal to actually reverse them.
I mean, in some senses, it probably will get so worse before it gets better because to build a, and in some sense, there is kind of a this inkling of there being at least people looking back again, try to figure out, at least among some forms of intellectuals. It's not happening in the working class that much, with the exception of Africa, where there's a big continual faith, but the kind of secularization, scientific secularization, is kind of one of the problems. One of the things I try to write about, and I wrote this in one of my essay about Hanoi of all places, where I spent a month, is at a certain level, I'm actually reading Machiavelli now for a course, and one of the things that frustrated me about the book, his discourses on Livy, was what's the goal here? Like, you're nation building, you're playing sim nation. Like, what's the goal? Like, what is a good society? And to my sense, one measure of a good society are people happy, man. People happy, and we have people in the U.S. are not happy, and it's really kind of to be very anecdotal. I mean, you can't spend a month in Hanoi, which has 1/20th the income of the United States, and fly back into JFK and not see not have a jarring kind of like, what's going on here. There's a I'm not saying Vietnam doesn't have problems. I'm not saying Hanoi doesn't have problems. I'm not saying that a lot of people in Hanoi wouldn't push a button if they were asked, could you just immediately move to the U.S., which is a whole separate issue. But there's a deep unhappiness in the U.S., and as kind of again, a lack of meaning, and you have to ask yourself why. What do we want? Do we want more? Is enough? Is a lot of stuff the kind of route to happiness, or is it kind of having what you call bonds? And we I talked about when I talk about what I call the your address in the universe of meaning. It used to be people want to have a place in the universe of meaning. They want to know, like, as a former mathematician, I can tell you, like, in the old days, the bonds you talk about, the traditional bonds, gave you a sense of it was a three variable or four variable or five variable coordinate in the universe of meaning. It was like what's your clan, your family, what's your occupation, where do you come from, and what's your faith, and and everybody understood that. It was a universal language, like, oh, hello, I'm blank, and here's who I am, and that gave a sense of orderness and a sense of place, and also it came with a metaphysical address as well, because that was the faith component, as well as the family component. We've replaced that with a bespoke infinite variable address. You define you. You define who you are, and we have to accept it. We have to accept your bespoke definition of what it means to be you, and it's made everybody completely untethered. And it's also made it very hard to talk to people because, like, who are you? And it's also made it very, very easy to offend, because we come with very, very different sets of meanings that we've created for ourselves. So we have to put that at the top of the hierarchy, and we ask everybody to accept us as we are. And we've created communities of one, which is almost a tautology towards loneliness. We've created people who are deeply unhappy, and you say the free flag fly. I mean, just sit. Often when I fly back into JFK, I'm traveling a lot. Before I can take my bus home, I have to sit in Port Authority for 2 to 3 or 4 hours. And I lived in New York for 20 years. I absolutely adore New York at one level, but it's really shocking to go from a place like Hanoi, which any urban planner or any Davos type spreadsheet brain would tell you was a god awful place, and go from a place that's functional and happy at a spiritual level or at a very human metaphysical level, and then come into the U.S. where everybody seems angry and miserable, and that contrast, I think, is what kind of I want to keep exploring. Is like, why are we in the West so miserable,
Yeah.
and again, the spreadsheet brains out there would tell me I'm wrong, because look, we have self-reported happiness polls. Like, A is self-reported, that's great, but B, I'm a scientist. Unhappiness is a measure. The most kind of core measure of unhappiness is what I was going back to before, which is suicide. Like, if a society is killing itself, that tells you something deeply is wrong with it. That's the canary in the coal mine. You can't tell me a society that's killing itself in such numbers is happy.
Yeah, I have a deep suspicion that this whole exercise of forming your own value system, whatever you think about how terrible oppression is and not being able to let your so-called freak flag fly, I think this exercise in itself is deranging, and it's not a a fun thing to do. We're sold on the idea that this is the purpose of life, to find your authentic self, and but it's a mentally deranging type of activity that takes your whole life, because the thing is, like you've been on Wall Street, you've essentially attained, the upper echelon of a very respected profession. There's nothing there after every increment in attainment of status or money or whatever that's supposed to be interesting and fulfilling. There's nothing there. The abyss opens wider and wider in front of you. And it's, I think some people just never get to that point, and maybe they still can delude themselves of, oh, okay, if one day when I have the house and the car and the thing, then I'll be happy. And then they might be, chasing that fire truck the whole way through their lives. But for people who actually get there, it's a very so-called dark black pill to see that there's nothing there. There really is, and there's more responsibility if you want to climb the ladder and stress yourself out more, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, and on the whole, yeah, it's not a fun thing to do, and I feel like people very much underestimate how much of a toll that takes on the psyche of, you know, maybe people who are more sensitive to this stuff as well.
Yeah, I I recently tweeted something. I try not to tweet much these days, but I was talking about how when I was on Wall Street, everybody has what's called an FU spreadsheet, where it literally tracks their net worth by the second, almost, because you can do live feeds now. And when they start, they always have a goal. When they hit that goal, they're going to quit,
I
retire.
never
Nobody
do.
does. Everybody keeps moving that goal higher and higher. And you know, it just becomes this kind of, you know, it's a cliche at this point to say that people in Wall Street are are um, are out for money, and but I don't think people who haven't been there, who haven't realized how deep that is, how deep the kind of materialism is. And again, I love my friends from Wall Street. They're really good people, and many of them. There's some who aren't, but you know, I don't understand. I don't understand the kind of being on a mouse wheel like they are. And the ones who, I'll say, the ones who have managed to do the best do have a spiritual side. There was a gentleman who I worked with for close to 20 years, who probably had the best work life balance I've ever seen. Where he was very high up in the Mormon Church, and that took precedent. And we all knew, he made it very clear from the beginning that there are certain things I cannot do, because of my commitments to both my family and my community, his congregation. And he was able to he was one of the few people, when he reached his goal, where he walked away, because he had something else there. He had something else there that was Wall Street was a game to him in many ways. He took it seriously, but it wasn't his goal in life. His goal in life was to be a good father, and a deeply moral person, as he defined it. It enabled him to. He was one of the happiest people I know, and he still is very happy. And so I think, the people who go into it for the money, in some senses, are the people who never end up getting out.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the it was David Graeber, the bullshit jobs thesis. It always struck me that I don't necessarily think that the jobs are bullshit. I was just thinking about what my ancestors, like the literal bullshit that they had to go through to maintain, subsistence agriculture and things like that, like absolutely torturous types of work in terrible conditions. And they did them, and they didn't have, the anime that you described. They were tethered to something greater, and there was a purpose to the completion of the job, that was more important than the actual job itself. And I think, when people look for meaning in their jobs, yes, at some level, every job is bullshit. I mean, I'm podcasting. This is not like, not doing brain surgery here or something like that. Obviously, I could, if I navel gaze enough, I could see the futility of this. Just throwing my voice into the void. But it gives me, it's fun and pleasant, and I like to do it. And I luckily have some external meaning in my family, and my feeble attempts at religion to compensate for that. But I think, this whole setting up of, okay, yeah, the job as the finality of what you're supposed to do is the problem here, not the jobs in themselves.
Yeah, one of the things I wrote is, I wrote about that I wrote it on Memorial Day weekend, or Labor Day weekend, which I guess is now, but like 3 years ago was, instead of writing a Labor Day piece about the dignity of work, I wrote about the dignity to endure. For a lot of people, a job is something to endure, but where the big difference is whether or not your job is a craft. And where people are involved, where you see immense pride in the working class for jobs is, and I'm not saying the working class doesn't take pride in their jobs, but it being you know, being somebody who is part of a large corporation at like Walmart or whatever is very different from being an auto mechanic or a plumber or electrician, where it's a craft or a carpenter, where it's you creating the thing, and you know I think there's almost a kind of like a binary there, where a job that is what we would call as a craft can bring immense pride and can bring immense sense of meaning. But when it's not a craft, it's hard to turn that into a way of being meaningful.
Yeah, I think that's the Matt Crawford thesis, and I think it's a really good one. I know we're coming up on time a little bit now. I want to ask you the last question. The question of the show. Everyone gets this question. It's about a subversive thinker that you think is underrated and that people should maybe check out.
Okay, I'm going to give you two answers. Is that fair? Uh,
Absolutely,
the first answer I was going to give you, you apparently already had him on the podcast, so I can't say he's underrated.
very
I
well rated here.
I can't pronounce his last name.
Theodore Dalrymple, I believe, but
Right. Okay. What's his actual name?
Anthony Daniels.
Yeah, so he's he came much earlier than I. I wish I had known about it before. Although I'm not sure I wish I knew about it before, because it's good to have come to similar conclusions independently. But he I think you have anybody who again is not ideologically blinded, who's working with a very quote dysfunctional the lower members, who doesn't come to some sort of similar conclusions about how out of touch we elites are, and then also again how much we're willing to absolve the responsibility at an individual level. Um, so since you already had him on here and he's well known, I would say Augusto del Noce, the Italian philosopher. I've read. He's notoriously hard to read, so I can't have said I've read him. I've read some very good articles about him in I believe it's First Things magazine, by the man who translates him.
He was on the show as well, Carlo Lancelotti. Yeah.
I
And
can't.
very well sourced. Yeah, no, but it's a very good recommendation. I think, except for I guess him, no one else recommended Del Noce on the show, and I think he's criminally underrated.
I haven't read Del Noce's stuff on sexuality. It's not my interest, but he is kind of the first person who put into words what I obviously I said at a larger political level, where that I always say I now basically that communism and capitalism are just two sides of the same material coin, and that the debate we're having in the West between communism and capitalism is kind of a debate on how you slice up the pie, when we should be having a debate which is by having that debate we're seeding the grounds of saying that what's really lacking is a spiritual lacking, and it's not about economics, it's about culture, it's about spirituality. But I to the degree I can understand him, and I've been very impressed with his stuff. I feel like I can't imagine. I don't understand why he's not more well read.
Yeah, I think it's also because he hasn't been translated. It was very recent that Lancelotti took it upon himself to actually do the translations. He's been referenced a lot by some thinkers who happen to speak Italian, but yeah, he's very much a new addition to the philosophical Western canon, especially now that like you mentioned as well, religion is starting to trickle back into a lot of intellectual circles, so people are more interested.
I'm very glad you had Carlos on this. That's fantastic. He's a
Yeah,
he's a wonderful guy.
he is.
He's underappreciated, by the way.
Absolutely, yeah, he has his own twist on things as well. He's not just Del Noche's translator. He's got a whole opus of work that he's working on as well. So, yeah, it's been a good conversation. I recommend people go back and listen to it if they haven't. And I
Uh,
also want to, yeah,
yeah, I would just simply say, yeah, if you haven't listened to Carlos Lancelotti's, I'm going to go listen to it because he's a very thoughtful guy, and he's a math professor who's also a lifelong interest in philosophy.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's something about these math guys. I've had quite a few quite a few math professors on here, not related to math because that's definitely not my wheelhouse. But yeah, there is something, I guess, into peering into the source code of reality, and then coming back a bit more spiritual than when you left. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, I want to point people to the wonderful Substack, Walking the World, and also to the book Dignity, which I think people should obviously, in light of the clarifications that you've given on your journey, but is still a wonderful document, and yeah, very very much worthwhile understanding a bit more about people that you might not encounter in day to day life. So thank you so much, Chris.
And thank you for having me.